The winter of 1943 descended on the Eastern Front like an iron fist. Snow fell in thick curtains across the Russian steppe, burying roads, freezing rivers, turning the landscape into an endless white hell. In a makeshift workshop outside Kursk, surrounded by the wreckage of war, a group of Soviet engineers stood before something they had never expected to see up close. A German Tiger tank. The beast sat there in the dim light of oil lamps, its armor scarred by battle, its tracks silent. This was not just any tank. This was the machine that had terrorized Soviet armored divisions for months. The tank that seemed invincible. The tank that had changed the mathematics of warfare itself. Among the engineers that night was Aleksandr Ivanovich, a man whose hands were permanently stained with grease, whose eyes carried the weight of too many desperate repairs on frozen battlefields. He approached the Tiger slowly, reverently, the way one might approach a sleeping predator. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air as he placed his hand on the cold steel. "Comrades," he said quietly, "tonight we learn from our enemy. What happened over the next 72 hours would reshape Soviet tank doctrine for generations to come. But to understand why, we need to understand what they found inside that Tiger, and more importantly, what it taught them about the nature of war itself." Part 1. The Perfect Machine. The disassembly began at dawn. Ivanovich and his team worked methodically, their tools scraping against steel that was harder, thicker, more precisely manufactured than anything they had ever encountered. The Tiger's armor plates were not welded in the crude, functional way of Soviet tanks. These were masterpieces of metallurgy, each piece fitted with Germanic precision. As they removed the engine covers, one of the younger engineers, Dmitri, let out a low whistle. The Maybach engine sat before them like a work of art, 650 horsepower of finely tuned German engineering. The cylinders were machined to tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. The fuel injection system was a marvel of complexity. "Look at this," Dmitri said, running his fingers along the engine block. "Every component is perfect. This isn't mass production. This is craftsmanship." Ivanovich nodded slowly, but his expression was troubled. He had been an engineer long enough to know that perfection always comes with a price. "Keep going," he said. "I want to see everything." They worked through the day and into the night. The transmission revealed itself to be an 8-speed mechanical puzzle, each gear cut with such precision that it required specialized tools just to adjust. The steering system used a double-radius design that gave the Tiger incredible maneuverability for its size, but the complexity was staggering. 192 roller bearings, 76 oil seals, dozens of components that had to work in perfect harmony or the entire system would fail. The gun was a masterpiece. The 88mm KWK-36 could penetrate any Soviet tank from distances that seemed almost absurd. The sighting system incorporated optics that Soviet factories could not hope to replicate. The breech mechanism operated with a smoothness that spoke of hundreds of hours of fine adjustment. As the hours passed, a pattern emerged. Every system in the Tiger was over-engineered. Every component pushed the boundaries of what was technically possible. The tank was not just a weapon. It was a statement, a declaration that German industry could produce machines that transcended the crude necessities of war. But Ivanovich saw something else, something that made his stomach tighten with each new discovery. On the second day, as they examined the road wheels, a young mechanic named Pavel made an observation. "Comrade Ivanovich, these wheels are interleaved. Look at how they overlap. It must give incredible traction and distribute the weight beautifully." "Yes," Ivanovich replied. "Now imagine you are in the field. It is winter, like now. Mud freezes between these wheels overnight. How do you remove it?" Pavel's face fell. I suppose you would need to disassemble half the suspension system," Ivanovich finished, "in temperatures that freeze metal and break tools, while the enemy advances. And if you break one wheel, you cannot simply replace it. You must remove multiple wheels to reach the damaged one. What takes us 10 minutes with a T-34 will take a Tiger crew 10 hours. The engineers fell silent. They began to understand what they were really looking at. The Tiger was not just a tank. It was a gamble, a bet that superiority in design could overcome the brutal realities of industrial warfare. Every magnificent component was simultaneously a vulnerability. Every precision-engineered system was a potential failure point. On the third night, they gathered around a table, covered in sketches and notes. Ivanovich addressed his team, his voice heavy with exhaustion and revelation. "Gentlemen, we have examined perhaps the finest fighting vehicle ever constructed. The question we must answer is not, can we build something like this? The question is, should we?" He picked up a gear from the Tiger's transmission, holding it up to the light. "This single gear requires machine tools we do not have. The steel must be alloyed with elements in short supply. It must be heat-treated in furnaces that take weeks to prepare. And when we are done, we will have produced one perfect gear. In that same time, with those same resources, we could build 3 entire T-34s. "But comrade," Dmitri protested, "surely one Tiger is worth 3 T-34s in battle?" Ivanovich smiled sadly. "Perhaps, if the Tiger never breaks down, if its crew never needs to repair it under fire, if the fuel supply never falters, if the spare parts arrive on time. If. War does not care about perfection, my friend. War cares about what shows up, what keeps running, what can be fixed when it breaks. And everything breaks." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "The Germans have made a magnificent machine, but they have forgotten something crucial. A tank that cannot be maintained is not a tank. It is a very expensive metal coffin." The room was quiet, except for the wind howling outside. "We will learn from this machine," Ivanovich continued. "We will steal every good idea we can adapt. But we will never forget the lesson it teaches. The lesson is not about how to build the perfect tank. The lesson is about why you should not try." Part 2. The Philosophy of War. In the weeks that followed, Ivanovich found himself in meetings with senior military commanders. The rooms were thick with cigarette smoke and the tension of men making decisions that would determine the fate of nations. On the table between them sat technical drawings of the Tiger alongside sketches of proposed Soviet heavy tanks. "We have the designs ready," one general announced, tapping his finger on the blueprints. "We can match the Tiger's armor. We can match its gun. We can build our own invincible beast." Ivanovich chose his words carefully. "Comrades, we can certainly attempt to match the Tiger specification by specification, but I must ask you to consider the cost, not just in rubles and resources, but in time, in opportunity, in lives." He pulled out his notebooks, filled with calculations made during those long nights examining the German tank. To produce a Tiger-equivalent tank, we would need to divert resources from current production. Our factories would need retooling. Our crews would need months of additional training. Our supply chain would need complete reorganization. And at the end of all this effort, we might produce 10 such tanks per month. Maybe 20 if we are fortunate. And in that same period, another officer asked, in that same period, we currently produce 500 T-34s, tanks that our crews already understand, tanks that can be repaired with basic tools, tanks that run on whatever fuel we can find, tanks that keep coming back to the fight. A colonel leaned forward. But surely quality must count for something. One German tank can destroy 5 of ours. Can it? Ivanovich challenged gently. The Tiger is formidable, yes, but it can only be in one place. It can only engage one target at a time. And when it breaks down, as all machines do, it requires specialized recovery equipment, trained technicians, specific parts. We have encountered Tigers abandoned on the battlefield, not because they were destroyed, but because they could not be repaired under field conditions. He stood and began to pace. The Germans have made a choice. They have chosen excellence over abundance. They look at warfare as if it were a duel between machines where the superior design triumphs. But war is not a duel. War is a flood, and you cannot hold back a flood with a single perfect stone, no matter how magnificent. The room erupted in debate. Some officers saw wisdom in Ivanovich's words. Others bristled at what they saw as defeatism, an unwillingness to pursue greatness. The argument stretched late into the night. Finally, the ranking general raised his hand for silence. Engineer Ivanovich, let me ask you directly. If you could build a tank, any tank, what would you build? Ivanovich did not hesitate. I would build a tank that our soldiers can trust, not because it is invincible, but because when it fails, they can fix it. I would build a tank that our factories can produce in numbers that matter. I would build a tank that does not demand perfection from every link in a 1,000-kilometer supply chain. I would build a tank that embodies not our aspirations, but our reality. He paused, then added quietly, the Tiger is a tank built for Germany's fantasy of how war should be. We must build tanks for the war that actually exists, a war of mud, snow, chaos, and endurance. The general nodded slowly. You make a compelling argument, but we cannot simply ignore German innovations. Nor should we, Ivanovich agreed. We should study everything, take what works, improve our armor where possible, upgrade our guns when feasible, but always maintain our core advantage: simplicity, reliability, numbers. The Germans have shown us the ceiling of what is possible. Let us show them the power of what is practical. In the months that followed, Soviet tank design evolved. The IS series incorporated heavier armor and more powerful guns, learning from German innovations. Suspension systems improved. Engines became more reliable. But the fundamental philosophy remained unchanged. Soviet tanks would be built for the reality of industrial warfare, mass production, field maintenance, relentless presence. Ivanovich's influence grew. His notebooks, once merely technical records, became something more, a meditation on the relationship between engineering and warfare, between ambition and wisdom, between the desire for perfection and the necessity of persistence. He wrote, "Steel is honest. It reveals the truth about those who shaped it." The tiger's steel speaks of pride, ambition, the dream of invincibility. Our steel speaks of different truths: adaptation, resilience, the acceptance that war is won not by those who never fall, but by those who always rise again. Part 3. The human element. Ivanovich began to spend more time at the front lines, talking with tank crews. He wanted to understand warfare not from blueprints, but from the men who lived inside the machines he helped create. He met a young tank commander named Sergei, barely 20 years old, whose T-34 had been hit 7 times in 4 months. Each time, his crew had managed to repair it enough to return to combat. "The fascists have better tanks," Sergei told him matter-of-factly, as they sat on the hull of his battered vehicle. "Their armor is thicker. Their guns hit harder. But you know what? We are still here. Last month, we encountered a Tiger. Beautiful machine, terrifying. It destroyed 2 of our tanks before we could flank it. But then we did flank it, 3 of us from different angles. It could only face the one direction. Numbers 1. And when your tank breaks?" Ivanovich asked. Sergei laughed. "When? You mean every day? Yesterday the fuel pump failed. We replaced it with parts from a truck. Last week the transmission started grinding. We packed the gears with grease and prayers. It still runs. Not smoothly, but it runs. That is all we ask." Another crew member, a grizzled mechanic named Boris, chimed in. "I have heard stories about the German tanks. They say if something breaks, you need a factory to fix it. Specialized tools, trained technicians. We fix our tank with a hammer and spite." Ivanovich smiled, but his heart was heavy. These young men deserved better, yet he also understood that better in their circumstances did not mean perfect. It meant functional, repairable, present. He visited field repair stations, watching mechanics work miracles with limited resources. He saw fuel pumps repaired with gasket material cut from leather belts. He saw electrical systems jury-rigged with wire, scavenged from destroyed vehicles. He saw engines coaxed back to life by men who understood their machines with an intimacy born of desperate necessity. One night, in a field hospital, he met a German tanker who had been captured. The young man was cooperative, eager to talk, perhaps seeking absolution through explanation. "The Tiger was magnificent," the German said in halting Russian. "Every day, we performed rituals of maintenance, checking oil seals, adjusting track tension. The manual was 200 pages. 200 pages of procedures that had to be followed precisely, or the machine would fail." "And did it fail?" Ivanovich asked. The German's eyes filled with frustration. "Constantly. The interleaved wheels froze in winter. The transmission overheated in summer. The engine drank fuel faster than supply could deliver. We spent more time maintaining it than fighting with it. In the end, we abandoned it, not because you destroyed it, but because we could not get the parts to repair the steering system." He looked at Ivanovich with something like envy. "Your tanks are crude, simple, but they keep coming. Always more, always fighting. We would destroy 5, and 10 more would appear. We could not maintain that mathematics." Ivanovich later wrote about this conversation. "The enemy tanker showed me the truth hidden inside German excellence. They built a machine that demanded perfection from an imperfect world. Every component had to be ideal. Every procedure had to be followed exactly. Every support system had to function flawlessly. And when reality inevitably failed to meet these demands, the perfect machine became a useless monument. These experiences crystallized Ivanovich's philosophy. He began to articulate principles that would guide Soviet armor design for decades. First, a tank crew must be able to perform 90% of repairs with basic tools and minimal training. Second, every component should be overbuilt for endurance, not precision. Better a part that works roughly for 1,000 hours than perfectly for 100. Third, design for the worst conditions, not the ideal. Assume mud, snow, incompetent maintenance, irregular fuel supply, and desperate improvisation. Fourth, the best tank is the one that arrives at the battle. A superior design delayed is an inferior design delivered. Fifth, trust soldiers over systems. Men will always find ways to keep fighting if their machines allow it. These principles were not just technical guidelines. They were a philosophy of survival, forged in the crucible of total war. Part 4. The Long Shadow. As the war ground toward its bitter conclusion, the lessons of the Tiger took deeper root. Ivanovich watched as Soviet industry refined its approach. The IS-2 heavy tank emerged, incorporating heavy armor and a massive gun, but maintaining the core Soviet virtues of relative simplicity and battlefield maintainability. He attended a demonstration of the IS-2 for military leadership. The tank performed admirably, its 122mm gun devastating targets with authority that rivaled anything the Germans fielded. But what impressed Ivanovich most was watching the crew perform a track repair in under 20 minutes with nothing but standard tools. This, he told a colleague, is victory. Not the biggest gun or the thickest armor, but the ability to keep fighting when things go wrong. Because things always go wrong. The war ended, but Ivanovich's work continued. He became a teacher, a mentor, a voice of experience in the rapid development of post-war armor. The Soviet Union, emerging as a superpower, faced new pressures to innovate, to compete, to demonstrate technological prowess. Ivanovich found himself fighting familiar battles in new contexts. Young designers, unburdened by memories of frozen battlefields, wanted to push boundaries, to create revolutionary new machines. Ivanovich did not discourage innovation, but he insisted on grounding it in reality. By all means, explore new ideas, he would tell them. But never forget to ask, can it be maintained by an exhausted crew at midnight in the rain? Can it be repaired with the tools they actually have, not the tools we wish they had? Will it start tomorrow morning, after sleeping in sub-zero temperatures? He kept that small gear from the Tiger tank on his desk. Students would sometimes ask about it. He would hold it up, letting the light catch its precisely cut teeth. This represents everything right and everything wrong with engineering ambition, he would explain. Look at it. Perfect, beautiful, a triumph of manufacturing, and utterly impractical for the conditions in which it had to operate. This gear required specific tools to install, specific lubricants to maintain, specific knowledge to repair. It was part of a system that tolerated no compromise, no improvisation, no imperfection. And that system failed. He would set the gear down gently. Your job as engineers is not to create perfection. Your job is to create success. Sometimes those are the same thing. Usually, they are not. In the late 1950s, Ivanovich traveled to the West as part of a technical exchange program. In Germany, he toured tank factories that had once produced tigers and panthers. The factories were different now, older, quieter, producing civilian machinery. He met Ernst, a former German tank engineer who had designed transmission systems during the war. The two men, once enemies, found themselves in reflective conversation over coffee. "I have thought often about our tanks," Ernst said, his hands wrapped around his cup for warmth despite the mild weather. "We believed we could engineer our way to victory. We thought if we made our machines superior enough, it would compensate for our limitations in other areas. Numbers, resources, strategic position. And what do you believe now?" Ivanovich asked. Ernst sighed. "I believe we confused technical achievement with tactical wisdom. Yes, the Tiger was a marvel, but a marvel that required 1,000 things to go right. And in war, nothing goes right." Ivanovich nodded. "We made different mistakes. In our pursuit of simplicity, we sometimes sacrificed our crew's safety. We accepted losses that better design might have prevented. There is no perfect answer. But if you had to choose again," Ernst pressed. Ivanovich thought carefully. "I would choose to build machines that keep my soldiers alive by keeping them in the fight. Not invincible machines that strand them when they fail. I would choose to build weapons that fit the war we had, not the war we imagined." They sat in silence for a moment, two old engineers contemplating choices made long ago. "You know what haunts me most?" Ernst finally said. "The young men who died because we gave them machines they could not maintain. Crews who abandoned Tigers not because they were outfought, but because a fuel pump failed and they had no way to repair it. That is the cost of pursuing perfection." Ivanovich placed a hand on Ernst's shoulder. "The cost of war is always too high. We can only try to build machines that minimize it, not by making them unbeatable, but by making them reliable." This conversation stayed with Ivanovich. He incorporated it into his lectures, using it to illustrate how engineers from opposing sides had learned the same hard lessons. Part 5. Legacy. Back in Moscow, Ivanovich threw himself into teaching with renewed purpose. His classroom at the Polytechnic Institute became legendary. Students did not just learn technical specifications and design principles. They learned philosophy, history, and the hard wisdom of real-world constraints. He would begin each term the same way. "Before we discuss how to build a tank, we must understand why we build tanks. They are not monuments to engineering prowess. They are tools of survival. Every choice you make as a designer will be paid for in blood, time, or opportunity. Choose wisely." His assignments were unconventional. He would give students a design problem with absurd constraints. Design an armored vehicle using only materials available in a rural village. It must be repairable by farmers. It must run on whatever fuel they can find. You have 3 days. At first, students protested. This was not real engineering. Where were the advanced materials, the precision manufacturing, the optimized systems? "This," Ivanovich would reply, "is the most real engineering possible. War strips away the comfortable assumptions of peacetime. What remains is necessity, ingenuity, and the courage to embrace imperfection. Show me what you can do when perfection is not an option." The exercises taught powerful lessons. Students learned to think not just about ideal performance, but about degraded operation. Not just about manufacturing capability, but about field maintenance. Not just about specifications, but about supply chains, training requirements, and the human element. Ivanovich's most famous lecture, delivered hundreds of times over the years, was called the Tiger's Lesson. He would dim the lights and project an image of the German tank onto the screen behind him. This machine, he would begin, represented the height of German engineering ambition in World War II. 850 horsepower, armor up to 120 millimeters thick, a gun that could destroy any Allied tank from ranges they could not hope to match. In every technical specification, it was superior. He would pause, letting the image linger. Germany produced approximately 1,300 Tigers during the entire war. In the same period, the Soviet Union produced nearly 60,000 T-34s. The United States produced nearly 50,000 Sherman tanks. Germany's enemies built 100 tanks for every Tiger that rolled off the line. Another pause. But surely, he would say, mimicking the protest he knew students were thinking, surely one Tiger was worth many lesser tanks? Perhaps. In ideal conditions, with perfect maintenance, with ample fuel, with trained crews, with reliable supply lines. But war does not provide ideal conditions. War provides mud, chaos, confusion, and constant mechanical stress. The Tiger's complexity, which made it formidable, also made it vulnerable. He would then share stories from his experience. Tigers abandoned due to minor failures. German crews overwhelmed not by superior enemy tanks, but by sheer numbers. The strategic calculation of building the invincible few versus the resilient many. The lesson of the Tiger is not about specific technical choices, he would conclude. The lesson is philosophical. Do you design for the war you wish to fight, or the war you must fight? Do you pursue perfection, knowing it will limit your numbers? Or do you embrace good enough, knowing it will allow you to be everywhere at once? As engineers, you will face this question in every project. The temptation to add one more feature, to make one more optimization, to pursue one more incremental improvement. And you must learn to answer. Does this help, or does this simply make me feel clever? Does this solve a real problem, or does it create new ones? Does this serve the user, or does it serve my ego? These lectures made Ivanovich famous beyond military circles. His philosophy influenced Soviet design thinking across many domains. The principle of good enough at scale versus excellent in scarcity shaped approaches to everything from agricultural machinery to housing construction. He wrote extensively, publishing papers and books that circulated internationally. Engineers in NATO countries read his work, recognizing universal truths about design philosophy that transcended Cold War ideology. His correspondence grew to include colleagues from every continent, all grappling with similar tensions between ambition and practicality. An American tank designer named Robert once wrote to him, "Your insights about the Tiger have transformed how we approach design reviews. We now ask, can a crew fix this? Before we ask, is this optimal? You have made us better engineers by teaching us to respect real-world constraints." Ivanovich treasured such letters. They suggested that the lessons paid for in blood on the Eastern Front might prevent future suffering elsewhere. Part 6. The circle closes. As decades passed, Ivanovich watched the world change. The Cold War brought new arms races, new technological competitions, new temptations to pursue perfection at any cost. He saw echoes of old mistakes in new contexts. When Soviet designers proposed ever more complex tank designs In the 1960s and 70s, Ivanovich was there to ask uncomfortable questions. When NATO showcased elaborate new weapon systems, he would shake his head and mutter about maintenance requirements and supply chains. He became known for a particular phrase, "War does not care about your press releases." But he was not simply a critic. He remained actively engaged in design work, pushing for innovations that served real needs. He championed improved crew protection, better optics, more reliable engines. He supported the development of reactive armor and improved fire control systems. His criterion was always the same. Does this help the crew survive and fight effectively, or does it simply make the machine more impressive on paper? He mentored hundreds of engineers who went on to shape armored vehicle design worldwide. They carried his philosophy forward, adapting it to new technologies and new conflicts. Some worked on the next generation of Soviet tanks. Others, after the Cold War ended, found themselves collaborating with former adversaries on international projects. One of his students, now a senior designer herself, once asked him, "Teacher, do you ever regret that Soviet tanks never achieved the legendary status of the Tiger? That we never built something that captured imaginations the way that machine did?" Ivanovich smiled. Legends are written by those who do not have to maintain the machines. The Tiger captured imaginations because it was extraordinary. Our tanks won the war because they were sufficient. I will take sufficient and victorious over extraordinary and defeated every time. "But is there no place for pursuing excellence?" she pressed. "Of course there is," he replied. "But excellence in service of what? Excellence that serves the soldier in the field, that improves their chances of survival and success. That is excellence worth pursuing. Excellence that serves the designer's pride, that makes a machine difficult to build and impossible to maintain. That is vanity wearing the mask of engineering." He grew older, but his mind remained sharp. He continued to write, to teach, to mentor. His house filled with notebooks, sketches, and models. Visitors were always welcome, and he would share stories late into the night, connecting past lessons to present challenges. He returned to Germany several times in his later years, always making a pilgrimage to whatever museum held a Tiger tank. He would stand before these preserved machines, now silent artifacts, and feel the weight of memory. In one such museum, a young German approached him, recognizing him from his books. They spoke for a while about engineering and history. Finally, the young man asked, "Do you hate this tank for what it did to your country?" Ivanovich shook his head. "I do not hate it. I respect it. It taught me more than almost anything else I have encountered. It showed me the seduction of perfection and the wisdom of pragmatism. It revealed truths about engineering, about war, about human nature. How can I hate such a profound teacher?" He placed his hand on the cold steel one more time. "This machine," he said softly, "represents both the heights of what human ingenuity can achieve and the limits of what it should attempt. That is not a lesson to hate. That is a lesson to carry forward." Epilogue. The final note. On a grey morning in 1991, as the Soviet Union itself was dissolving, Aleksandr Ivanovich sat at his desk, writing one final essay. His hands trembled slightly with age, but his thoughts were clear. He was 91 years old, and he knew his time was short. He wrote about that first night examining the Tiger, about the decades of work that followed, about the engineers he had mentored and the philosophy he had tried to pass on. But mostly, he wrote about endurance, I have lived long enough to see my country transform twice, he wrote. Once by war, once by peace. I have seen machines evolve from crude mechanical beasts to sophisticated, computer-controlled systems. But the fundamental questions remain the same. What do we build? For whom do we build? What costs are we willing to accept? And what values will we not compromise? The Tiger tank sits in museums now, a reminder of choices made long ago. Young people look at it and see only an impressive relic. They do not see the supply chains that could not sustain it, the crews that could not maintain it, the strategic miscalculation it represented. I hope they never need to learn these lessons the hard way. I hope the world has moved beyond the kind of total war that taught my generation such brutal truths. But if conflict comes again, if engineers must again design machines for war, I hope they will remember, build for your users, not for your pride. Build for reality, not for fantasy. Build for endurance, not for spectacle. Build for the many, not for the few. The Tiger was a magnificent machine. But magnificence alone does not win wars. Persistence wins wars. Adaptability wins wars. The courage to be good enough when perfect is impossible that wins wars. He set down his pen and looked out the window. Snow was falling again, as it had that night so many years ago when he first stood before the Tiger. The world had changed, but winter remained the same. His final public appearance was at a conference in Berlin, a gathering of engineers from around the world. He was too frail to stand for long, so he spoke from a chair, his voice soft but firm. "I am old," he began, "and soon I will be gone. But the lessons remain. Every generation of engineers must learn them again in their own way, through their own challenges. I can only hope that by sharing my experiences, perhaps some will learn from stories rather than suffering. The Tiger taught me that brilliance can be a trap, that complexity can be a weakness, that perfection can be the enemy of victory. These are not reasons to avoid ambition or to settle for mediocrity. They are reasons to be thoughtful about where we direct our ambitions and what we mean by excellence. Build machines that serve humans, not the reverse. Build machines that can be understood, maintained, and loved by those who depend on them. Build machines that acknowledge human imperfection and work with it rather than against it. And remember always, the greatest machine is not the one that never breaks. The greatest machine is the one that can be fixed when it breaks, that can be adapted when circumstances change, that can endure when perfection fails. The audience gave him a standing ovation. Many wept, moved by the presence of a man who had witnessed so much history and distilled it into such clear wisdom. That night, back in his hotel room, Ivanovich wrote a final letter to his granddaughter, who was studying engineering at university. It would be found after his death, his last words to the future. "My dear one, by the time you read this, I will be gone. But I want you to know that engineering, real engineering, is not about the machines we build. It is about the lives we serve. Every technical choice is a moral choice. Every design decision affects real people in real ways. I spent my life working with tanks, machines of war, and I do not apologize for that. In my time, tanks were necessary, but the principles I learned apply to anything you might build. Whether you design tanks or bridges or computers or anything else, ask yourself, am I building for humans or for my own pride? Am I solving real problems or creating new ones? Am I making something that will endure and serve, or something that will impress briefly and fail? The Tiger tank was a magnificent failure. It failed not because it was badly designed, but because it was designed without wisdom, without understanding the context in which it would exist, without respect for the limitations of the real world. Do not make this mistake. Be ambitious, yes. Be innovative, yes. Push boundaries and explore possibilities, but do so with humility, with an understanding that your users are human, that the world is messy, that perfection is impossible and should not be the goal. The goal is to serve well, to build things that make life better, easier, safer, to create solutions that work not just in ideal conditions, but in the chaos of reality. I have lived a long life, and I have tried to use it wisely. My greatest achievement is not any machine I helped design. It is the engineers I taught, the principles I passed on, the small contribution I made toward a philosophy of design that puts humans first. This is my legacy to you. Build with wisdom, build with humility, build for endurance, and never, ever mistake complexity for sophistication or perfection for success. The world needs engineers who understand that enough is often better than perfect, that simple is usually better than complex, that what can be maintained matters more than what impresses. Be such an engineer. Make me proud, not by building monuments to your cleverness, but by building tools that serve faithfully, that endure quietly, that make life a little bit better for those who depend on them. Remember the tiger, remember its lessons, and use that knowledge to build a better world. Aleksandr Ivanovich died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep. His funeral was attended by hundreds of engineers from around the world, a testament to the reach of his influence. Years afterward, in a small ceremony, a museum dedicated a permanent exhibit to his life and work. At the center of the exhibit stood a perfectly preserved gear from a Tiger tank mounted on a pedestal. The plaque beneath it read, "This gear represents the Tiger's paradox, technically perfect, strategically flawed." Aleksandr Ivanovich kept it as a reminder that excellence without wisdom is vanity, and that the best engineering serves not pride, but life itself. And so the story ends where it began, with a machine that changed the world not through its victories, but through the lessons it taught those who studied its failures. The Tiger sits in museums now, cold and silent, but the wisdom born from understanding it lives on, carried forward by every engineer who chooses pragmatism over perfection, service over spectacle, and endurance over legend. The question the Tiger posed, perfection or persistence, the few or the many, pride or pragmatism, remains relevant today in every field of human endeavor. And Aleksandr Ivanovich's answer echoes still. Build what can be fixed, trust what endures, honor the spirit in every component, and the legacy of wisdom will outlast the legend of perfection. In the end, history is not written by the victors or the defeated. It is written by those who learned.